especially pepper. Ancient Kerala occupied a unique place in the commercial world, with active trade centered around the ancient port of Cochin or Kochi. Kochi is derived from the word Kochutura, meaning small port or opening out to the sea. Agriculture being the main economic activity, plantations of cardamom, cashew nut, coconuts, coffee, ginger, pepper, rubber and tea brought into sharp focus the importance of the region. In addition, the rich green forests yielded valuable woods as ebony, rosewood and teak. With the arrival of the Portuguese near Calicut or Kozhikode in 1498, the region became the first in India to experience European intervention. The Dutch ousted the Portuguese in the 17th century, and their expansionist designs were in turn ended in 1741 by Maharaja Martandavarma of the princely state of Travancore. In the 1790s, Travancore and adjacent Cochin became protected states under the British Madras Presidency. Trade under the British flourished. Several business houses were born and have since been closely associated with the city of Cochin. Into this dynamic scenario, three prominent businessmen, J. Outterson, C. E. Myrus and R. H. Pierce appeared and conferred in this room in the year 1857. Over dinner, the idea to form a Chamber of Commerce in Cochin was born. The businessmen were aware of the importance of the trade from the Malabar coast. On 28th December of the same year, 8 business houses represented by C. E. Myrus, R. H. Pierce, J. H. Berry, N. Fitzgerald, A. S. Lawson, H. Hooney, Geo Brunton, S. Darley and P. Leslie made the Chamber of Commerce in Cochin a reality. The Chamber was to be an instrument to organize this trade and set the ground for a unified approach that would make Cochin the primary port on the western coast. Operating out of its new office in Fort Cochin, the first act was to establish a clear course of action. This resulted in the following objectives: encourage the growth of fair and well understood usage, provide acceptable means for commercial arbitration, and formulate precise procedures for recognition of practices as custom of the port. The initial years of the Chamber are best seen by its activities. Active part in obtaining electric power station at Cochin. Active part in construction of all-weather coating of roads. Active part in obtaining protected water supply for Fort Cochin. Initiation of action on the construction of a deep water port at Cochin. Instrumental in extending the rail line from Shoranur to Ernakulam. Playing an active part in construction of bridges that are even today the two main arteries connecting Ernakulam to Cochin and Willingdon Island. And most recently, the Chamber was instrumental in bringing to Cochin an international airport of world standards. The principal achievement in the initial years was the high degree of acceptance the Chamber was accorded by the local bodies. The coming of age of the Chamber can be demonstrated by 3 major changes. 1938, the Chamber was incorporated under the Indian Companies Act and gained a corporate status. 1962, the offices of the Chamber were shifted to Willingdon Island. 1963, by a special resolution passed in an extraordinary general meeting, the Chamber changed its identity to become the Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The dynamism of the Chamber has not diminished by the passing of the years. In fact, being led by a long line of stalwarts, the Chamber has integrated itself with other chambers, thus adding to its strength and influence. Today, the activities of the Chamber have expanded beyond Cochin. The Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry is one of the founder members of the Associated Chambers of Commerce and Industry of India, ASSOCHAM. Incorporated in 1920, ASSOCHAM represents the interests of industry and trade, interfaces with government on policy issues, and interacts with counterpart international organizations to promote bilateral economic issues. ASSOCHAM is represented on all national and local bodies and is thus able to proactively convey industry viewpoints for economic development. Having grown from strength to strength, the Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry offers a wide range of services. When it comes to representing the Cochin business community, strength and reputation holds the key to credibility. The Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry maintains a continuous dialogue with the central and state governments for better appreciation of trade and industry viewpoints. With participation and representation in 32 public bodies and over 15 expert committees, the Chamber's views are sure to have a good hearing at the state and national level. The Chamber is a storehouse of information, whether it is on resources, government policy, laws, city information or a mailing list. The Chamber's large database will assist you in building, managing and expanding your company. A classic example is the full-fledged statistics department. The department maintains and correlates information on all imports and exports through the Cochin port. This information is processed and is constantly used by both the members and the local government organizations. The Chamber is authorized to undertake weighment and measurement of cargo, issue quality certificates and certificates of origin, assist in legalization of export documentation. Networking with other similar bodies offers the Chamber and its members a wealth of knowledge to approach various issues with confidence. The Chamber is affiliated to all the major organizations in the country and participates in jointly held events. The Chamber has hosted many events, conferences and dialogues at the national and international levels that has opened the doors of Cochin to fresh investments and industries. The Chamber's newsletter keeps the members updated to developments in various fields of trade. The monthly information bulletin reviews and disseminates information on evolving government policies. With plans to introduce several new services and with a constant drive to provide the best representation to the businesses in Cochin, the Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry will continue to play a pivotal role in the years to come.
In 2008, IIFL Wealth dreamt big. Today, we are the leaders in wealth and asset management, credit solutions and succession planning. With more than $44 billion of assets under management, the trust of over 10,000 clients. We've achieved this faster than any other Indian financial enterprise, not by following the cardinal rules of financial.
Hello. Hello, Subash. Hello.
Hello, Garg Sahab. Namaskar.
Yeah, namaskar. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
Very well.
Your video is off.
Yes, because it says the host has stopped it.
Come
I
on.
can't do it from my side. So it's not allowing me to do it.
No, come on.
So please do it from your side.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Right.
Now we have enabled.
Okay, let me try. Still,
Come. Now we can see you, sir. Good, sir. Actually, I was going through your book. It's a fantastic book.
Oh, great. So
No,
I'm
no.
so happy you could have a look at it.
Then it's fantastic because you have covered all aspects and you have actually made India dream how to make it 10 trillion, not 5 trillion. It's excellent.
That's correct. I
Actually,
think
you have not talked about any rocket technology. You have talked about only some basic fundamental change we can catapult India to a 10 trillion dream.
absolutely. Because the businesses which will do it, they don't need to be scientists capable of solving the rocket problems.
That's right.
They need to do business well, and the policy need to assist it.
Absolutely.
That's the central argument. So I think what I'm trying to establish through this book is that the policy plays an extremely important role.
Yeah.
We have got a lot of things right in policy, but a lot of things wrong as well. And unless we change that policy course, perhaps it may remain only as a dream. But to realize it, we need to have those bold policy reforms.
No, that's right. How to convert the dream to a reality.
That's correct.
That's right.
The point. Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
So at 6 o'clock, we'll start, sir. Others will join. We'll start. Actually, this is a very exclusive group wherein we try to invite only limited people so that the focus remains, you see. Otherwise, there is no point in talking about economy to everybody. People who understand economy, people who are part of the trade and commerce, they only need to understand so that at least we convey the right message across.
Very true. So as a kind of format, how would you like to go? I speak for about 30-35 minutes and then we have question answer sessions.
That's right, sir.
Or any other format.
No, that is right. Actually we'll start with a welcome. Then we'll hand over the stage to you wherein you can talk maybe around 40-45 minutes, whatever time you want.
All right.
Then it will be followed by maybe around 15 minutes to 20 minutes Q&A. And then followed by vote of thanks.
All right. Even the question answer session can be a little longer because I don't know, you allocated me the time 8 to 7:30 or we are to finish in 1 hour?
No, we allocated the time 6 to 7:30.
Yeah.
It depends. See, generally what happens is some speakers tend to talk a little longer. That's why we are stretched it up to 7:30. It depends. As long as you are convenient, it's fine with us.
Yeah, so I'm comfortable. I have allocated the time up to 7:30.
Okay.
So I'll speak for about 35-40 minutes to set the context and speak about what the reforms, etc., which the book talks about.
Okay.
And then let's leave for 30-35 minutes of good question answer session.
Fine, sir.
That's where I find the best participation taking place. And that is where the real curiosity and the comment comes. So that's
Sure. Can we start? It's almost 6 o'clock, sir. We'll start.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Fine. And on my left is, before we start, on my left is Mr. Veeramani. He's a chartered accountant and he's the vice president of the chamber, sir.
Oh, very nice seeing you, Mr. Veeramani. So you are physically in the chamber building, right?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, wonderful. Right.
Good evening, all of you. Thank you for joining for the India Forward Talk series. Today we have Sri Subash Garg, Subash Chandra Garg. He's a former Finance Secretary of India. Thank you, sir, for joining for the program. For the further proceeding, I would request our Chamber President, Harikumar sir, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Right, please.
Sri Subash Chandra Garg Sahab, distinguished guests, past president, chamber members, and all friends who have logged in. It's indeed a great occasion to be here today to introduce the speaker for the 5th session of the India Forward series. Sri S.C. Garg, currently a freelance policy strategist on economy, Finance and Fiscal Affairs. As a former member of the IAS for more than 36 years, he served as Secretary Economic Affairs, Finance Secretary, and as Power Secretary. To the benefit of the speaker and the invited guests who are new to the chamber, let me, at the cost of repeating myself, say 2 words about the chamber. Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry was established in 1857. That is probably the first war of independence, and is among the oldest chambers in the country. And we are one of the promoter chambers of ASSOCHAM. We have been playing a stellar role in shaping the policies of the government by making strategic interventions at the policy making stage, both at the center as well as the state. We also claim to have mooted the idea of even the Wellington Island, that is the Cochin port itself, because we are though we are located in the Wellington Island, which is part of the port area of Cochin, we are actually started much earlier. And we also have played a role in developing the city of Cochin, because it was our vision that the Cochin port came up here, and Cochin port has played a role in not only developing the business and the economy of Kerala, but even that of South India. We also act as an interface between the trade and commerce, and as I said, by making a lot of policy papers to the government so that the industry and trade views are getting represented at the policy maker level. We are invited for pre-budget discussions by the government of India, and of course we also interact with the government of Kerala before every budget, and our views on the budget are widely reported by the media, because basically the media want to get a feedback on how the budget, whether it is central or the state, is going to catapult the business and the economy, how it will be viewed as by the trade and commerce sector. So our views are generally sought after. Now coming to the activities of the chamber, we have a CEO forum discussion every month, wherein top CEOs of Kerala, of Cochin, deliberate over topics of contemporary interest, and the topics vary from cryptocurrency to water conservation to sewage disposal to banking reforms. And the last session we had was on jackfruit as a clinically proven solution to diabetes. And topics vary, as I was currently telling. And coming to the India Forward series, it's a new talk series which we planned this year. And this is the 5th session, as I was telling. It has been received well and is going great and getting very rave reviews. For the benefit of honorable guests, let me tell you that Sri Jairam Ramesh, Sri S. Gurumurthy, Sri Yashwant Sinhaji, Sri Montak Singh Alwarji, and Sri Sujit Ballaji were the speakers on the previous occasion. We also had Dr. Abdul Kalam Memorial Lecture on 8th of January, which was addressed by Dr. Madhav Gadgil, the famous ecologist who headed the Gadgil Commission. Looking forward, we have a chamber day coming up, along with the next talk on India Forward series, and Sri Nitin Gadkariji, the Honorable Minister, will be the guest of honor, and it will be a physical session, and the physical session, the attendance will be by invitation. We will be extending the invitation to selected people because of various other considerations, and it is scheduled for 29th of April. Apart from this, these are the talks basically on macroeconomic issues. Apart from this, we also deal with specific issues, and to quote 1 or 2 sessions, we had one by Sri Ravi Gupta on decoding the direct tax provision. We also had one on the new labor codes, and we also had a session on the new trends in packaging. Now coming to the today's speaker, Sri Subash Chandra Garg Sahab needs no introduction. In other words, no words can describe the multifaceted personality that he is. In his well-acclaimed book, The US Dollar 10 Trillion Dream, he talks about building a $10 trillion economy which will transport India into an upper middle class from a developing economy, makes it prosperous, eliminate poverty, and take care of the concerns such as health, education, and infrastructure. It's a well-researched book wherein it talks about the current state of economy and almost 100 major policy reforms, macroeconomic as well as sectoral, which in his view will make our economy reach this magic figure of 10 trillion. He also believes that 5 fundamental reforms is key to achieve this. One is privatizing all commercial public sector undertakings. Another is reforms in the government expenditure to deliver goods and services to the people so that the wealth gets distributed to the welfare of all. Another key suggestion which he has is frame policy to digitize the economy. He also talks about building an environmentally sustainable economy and infrastructure, fundamental restructuring of agriculture and industry by removing people from agriculture, removing labor from farmers and laborers from agriculture. It would be interesting. I don't want to go on and on. It would be interesting to talk from the person who dreamt about 10 trillion economy. And I would now request Sri Subash Chandra Garg, the administrator, the former finance secretary, and the economist to address all of us. Before I hand over the stage, I would also request all the participants who have logged in to kindly key in the questions, whatever they have, so that it can be taken up one by one at the end of the session. So now let us hear Mr. Subash Chandra Garg. The stage is all yours, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hari Kumar, for this very nice introduction and also making the role of the Cochin Chamber so clearly articulated by you. A chamber which is working to further the interest of economy and business since 1857. And the chamber which contributes enormously to the policy discussion, I think is the right forum for me to speak about what kind of reforms India needs for making itself a $10 trillion economy. It's not that I have started talking about this. The book also mentions that, and I'll draw your attention to the budget of 1920, which was presented by Mr. Piyush Goyal, and I happened to be Economic Affairs Secretary at that time. In that budget, the government stated its policy goal of a $10 trillion economy by early 2030s. It had also presented a 10-dimensional vision stating the kind of changes which will be required in India to realize this dream. I am basically carrying out that mandate or that ambition or aspiration of India, and my work in last couple of years is basically to say and to see how India can actually realize this dream. And this dream is very much necessary for us. By the way, all of you are probably aware that in 1978, when China started reforming and adopting the market reforms, despite being a communist country, so to say, at that time, India and China had virtually the same level of per capita GDP. We were equally rich or equally poor, whichever way you want to see it at that time, because both of us were poor, right? And today, after about 42, 43 years, China is a $16 trillion economy, and we are still about $3 trillion only. China is 5 times richer than us. The per capita income is exceedingly, it exceeds $11,000 per capita. Our per capita income is only about $2,000. And all of us, it's very easy to see that what kind of goods and services people of a country with average per capita income of $11,000 can buy, and what the country with per capita income of $2,000 can buy. That is what explains the richness, the prosperity, the happiness of the people. I don't think there is any gainsaying, there is any dispute about the fact that the income and also wealth, but income first, determines the standard of life, the ability to avail the goods and services. At a very low level of income, you tend to get only the basic necessities of life, like food, for example, met. And we have the distributional problem also in the country, which makes some people not having enough to even buy enough food for that. The country needs to run a massive food subsidy, subsidized food scheme, and for last 2 years during the pandemic, run free ration distribution scheme to make people realize or meet at least the minimum calorific requirement of cereals, not of many other minerals and vitamins you need. And therefore, the kind of incomes which we have cannot even assure what most of us call multidimensional poverty beyond that. So they can't buy, purchase good education, they can't purchase good health, they can't even purchase good living accommodation and things like that. Meeting only bare minimum food, and that only the cereal needs, is not living a life with standard of which is deserving of human beings. So I think it's very, very necessary, and there should not be any debate or dispute in the country about it, that we need to become richer. Our economy need to grow from $3 trillion to at least $10 trillion, if not more. And that is the reason I have written this book and focused all my attention on this. Now, a $10 trillion goal for an economy like India at 3 trillion may also appear to be quite ambitious. Most of the people in the country are generally talking only about 5 trillion. I don't think it's a slogan or it's a goal. We should realize that at 5 trillion, we are still with 1.5 crore, 150 crore people. Our income would be only about 3,000 or 3,200 or $3,300 per capita. That's also not adequate. And therefore, as a country, we must aim at this 10 trillion. That 10 trillion will assure us an average income of about $6,000, which is, in my judgment, and if we do the right kind of calculations, that would be something which will assure a reasonably decent level of sort of food security and other consumption which the human beings require. And that's the reason why we should aim at the 10 trillion. Now, to come to this 10 trillion kind of thing, essentially, I think we all should be clear in that sense that the GDP is nothing but the collective national income. What you describe and we describe as gross domestic income is the aggregate collective income of all of us. Millions of people who work as workers, and we have 40 crore workers working in the country today. In a country of about 135 crore people, 40 crore are employed, the rest are out of, they are not employed. And our workers' participation rate is one of the lowest in the world. So, but 40 crore people still work, and they receive their incomes as wages, salaries, or intellectual or managerial, whatever, in different forms, they receive their income. So that's one segment of the GDP income which is distributed. The second part of the GDP goes to the entrepreneur, towards capital. So people who have contributed capital in the form of equity or in the form of loans, they receive a return on their capital. And that is the biggest driver of people investing in businesses and taking up all the task of producing goods and services. Ultimately, the reason they do it is, as the theory of enlightened self-interest suggests, or if you read Adam Smith's reason, that no one works or no one produces goods and services for somebody else's benefit. Essentially, they do it for them, but it so happens that the goods and service which they produce is also beneficial and produces utility for the other. That is the reason they buy. And therefore, entrepreneurship is extremely important for production of goods and services. If you don't have the entrepreneurship, the goods and services will not get produced, and no one will be able to sell, no one will be able to buy, or they will produce shoddy goods and services. And that is the reason the second part of the aggregate part of income goes to the capital or the entrepreneurs. In fact, the third share of the income, which goes to the government in the form of taxes, also comes from the businesses who earn what we describe as gross value added. So all the value produced by the businesses gets divided basically into three segments. Workers receive their wages, the entrepreneurs and the capital receives the return on their capital, and the government gets the taxes. If the GDP doesn't grow, these three segments will not receive more. And the workers ultimately take care of their households. So all the household's welfare and well-being depends upon the income which the workers get, because the capital households are relatively small and they can take care of that with the income they get, and they use most of it for investment purposes, which is what is also essential in an economy to grow. So the capital goes basically for further reinvestment and creating more capacity to produce, and the workers get the income for maintaining their families and the households for living better and having a better standard of life. And therefore, GDP growth is important for everyone. The workers, the capital, and the government. If the GDP doesn't grow, the government also will not get taxes. Government, if it chooses to borrow for the time being, that borrowing is also nothing but the tax which will be paid by the people in future. All borrowings are ultimately settled and paid for by the taxes which the government will collect in future. The tax is the only real income source of the government. And therefore, I just wanted to make this point, and I'm repeating that in a way, that the GDP growth is important for everyone. If you don't grow, you will remain poor. If you don't grow and your distribution deteriorates, then you have the worst outcome for the people. But if the GDP grows, if the income grows, even if some inequality increases, the chances are that the broad swath of the workers and the households would still be better. And therefore, GDP growth is most important. Now I come to the next point. Having said that the GDP growth is so important, how do you grow? What is required to make sure that the country grows or the GDP grows? In my book, I talk about three fundamental reforms which the country needs for its GDP to grow. The number one reform is that the government should be focused only and principally on the role which the government is supposed to play in the society. Government's primary role in the society is to produce public goods and services. And I think it should be clear to all of us that public goods and services are essentially the services which like defense, internal security, law and order, management of pollution, health and education services, judicial management, governance. Those are the public goods and services which the society entrusts to the government to do. And the government, in fact, raises taxes as sanctioned by the society to spend and provide the public goods and services, right? So, but over the years, especially after independence, the government has ventured into a lot of activities which are not public goods and services. The entire public sector which has come up in last 70, 75 years is meant or is designed or is working to produce what I would call the private goods and services, which normally the businesses should produce, the private sector should produce. Today, whether you are producing power in the public sector, that power can be produced by the private sector. Whether you are running MTNL, BSNL to provide telecom services, that services can be provided by the private sector. Whether you're running public sector banks, that banking services can be provided by the private sector. Whether you're running insurance companies, the insurance company services can be provided by the private sector. One can go on. Why do you run airlines? Why do you manage buses? Why do you run buses for that matter? All this is better done and more efficiently, more capital efficiency is there if these services are provided by the private sector. Just look at the kind of investment which India had to make in recapitalizing the public sector banks in last three years. We spent about 3 lakh crores over and above that. And the public sector banks could not raise any capital from the private and the market, whereas the private sector raised a lot of capital from the people, and the people were happy to invest and provide capital in them. Look at the telecom sector for that matter. Government of India has, in last 2 and 3 years, have invested over 1 lakh crores in BSNL and MTNL. And BSNL and MTNL don't serve more than 8 to 9% of India's telecom service users. And that also with very old technology, this 2G kind of thing. What is the necessity for the government to spend so much money and waste so much of capital to provide shoddy services which BSNL and MTNL provides? I can go on and give you a lot of examples. Air India has been recently privatized, but Air India made government lose over 1.3 lakh crores in last 5-7 years. When the government privatized this, government had to write off about 55,000 crores of capital and about 80,000 crores of loans, which were not repaid by that. It's good that it was incurring losses of about say 6,000 to 10,000 crores every year. And now with this being privatized, the government will not be burdened with that 10,000 crores or 8,000 crores of loss every year. So if you aggregate this, the kind of money, the kind of tax and the borrowing which the government spends on running businesses and doing a poor service by providing poor quality of services, that is not required to be done by the government. And therefore, the number one reform which I talked is that the government should be focused on doing the public goods and services. And the second reform, therefore, which is to allow the private sector to do, is to get the government out of the role which it has played for many years, that is to get out of the businesses which then can be run better by the private sector. The private sector has to be sort of provided the necessary systemic or policy support, and that's what the book talks about quite a lot, that in terms of various sectors and all, bigger reforms, fundamental reforms, sectoral reforms. See, the private sector, at any point of time, the business is not a constant or a stagnant kind of activity. It never stagnates. The businesses keep on changing from time to time. If 200 years back, we were discussing this, you talked about 1857. If you look at the 1857 economy of India at that time, there was no industry. India was an agricultural economy. We had some handicrafts and all, but those were the extension of human skills and the abilities to produce some handicrafts and handlooms and all. But there was no power use. There was no machines. There was no industry producing any of the industrial goods and services. You had no automobiles, you had no trucks, you had no hundreds of machines which we use today in our homes or for doing our activities were not there. That was an agriculture economy. And that was changing after the discovery of the steam engine to produce power, which later on the power was produced using electricity, which allowed the minerals and materials from the bottom of the earth to be converted into very useful product. If you look around your home today, while we will have agriculture produced for eating and several other things, but your home would have most goods which are industrial goods today. Whether it's refrigerator, whether it is television, whether it is air cooler, or for that matter, even a lot of steel and other things used in construction of home, or the laptop, etc., which I am talking to you from. These are all the industrial goods. And therefore, the country's policymakers need to recognize that from time to time, what creates value changes. And the earlier things, which are more mature for that matter, like agriculture, which had got matured, will add lesser value, and more of value will be added by the new technology and new industry. So this industrial revolution, which began sometime in the late 18th century and then spread all over the world in last 150 to 200 years, is something which we adopted at a very late stage in India. We industrialized very late. In fact, there was resistance to adopt the machines and the automatic technology for this, because we had fascination for the agricultural society, as our social mores and others were more directed towards the agricultural society, and we were late in adopting the industrial revolution, and that is where we probably lost out quite a lot. Now there is another opportunity which is there before the world, and that is the big opportunity is the digital economy which is getting built. Today, Mr. Hari Kumar also mentioned about cryptocurrencies, but whether it's the centralized database-based technologies, so it's automation in the form of fintechs, health tech, edutech, you name anything which is served by the real sector is being now served electronically by the technology today. And on top of that is more efficient, a very different kind of technology, the decentralized ledger technology or blockchain cryptography technology is coming out, which is giving a run for the money to even the centralized database technologies. So currency is changing, the businesses are changing, the finance is changing, and the whole world, the startups of the world, the new unicorns, new datacons, etc., which are coming and disrupting the existing incumbent businesses, are something which is presenting enormous amount of opportunity. If we don't take right kind of policy decisions, for example, if I can say the data is so fundamental to the digital economy that if we don't allow a free use of data and the ability of the businesses to use the data for generating the services, not only for Indians, but also for all over the world, the chances are that, like we lost out quite a bit by adopting a very sort of restrictive industrial policy regime, not permitting the private sector into many sectors, and constraining the private sector by license and permitrage and those kind of things. If we do this for the digital economy also, there are some dangers which you can see in the policy formulation. There are restrictive rules for e-commerce, there are restrictive rules for fintechs, there are restrictive rules for digital banks, there are restrictive rules for about data uses and many other things. And if we pursue that path, the chances are that we might again miss the digital economy bus. We have all the necessary abilities. Our human power is excellent. Our people are fantastically gifted and talented in terms of their ability to use data and produce digital services. They are fantastically efficient in financial services and all. They are also very good in academics and in the legal. But if we constrain them that you can't do it, we don't open up, or we close the data and other kind of restrictions put on them, then the chances are that you would have a situation where we will not be able to take advantage. By the way, today, if we take the digital economy as the economy which is sort of symbolized by chip as the hardware, the code as the software, and the networks or the nets as the system of producing and distributing services, then India is not really at a very great position in terms of chips or the hardware. We are struggling to have our first fab semiconductor fab unit in the country, whereas the world today, small countries like Taiwan and others, are producing so fine and so large quantity of the and with quality of the semiconductor chips and all, and we are struggling with the first one. We are not really great, and we have not solved and cracked the problem of how to get India ahead in the semiconductor revolution. Forget about going to the basics of polysilicons and making silicon chips and all. We are not really doing great even in terms of chip design and all. Our people try to, by the way, it's such a contrast that the global companies are using Indian talents in India to sort of design chips for them, but Indian companies and Indian businesses are not able to do so at all, and therefore there is a lot of waste of the talent in there is small gain. I would not say that when somebody designed the chip for Qualcomm or for some other company, there is still some value addition which is taking place in India, and our workers are getting income. But if we are able, if we have to be forefront if in the forefront, if you have to grow very fast and high, then we should be the leader in the hardware as well. Today, there are undisputably two leaders in the world about the hardware and the semiconductors, which is the US and the China. And India figures nowhere, by the way. We don't even produce 2% to 3% of the hardware in the country. Likewise, our infrastructure for digital economy is also very poor. I give an instance I quote a report about the fiber optics laying in the country. That report sort of lists 50 countries where the fiber access to homes and the buildings is higher than 1%, and we don't even figure in 1%. Our 1% of the homes and the buildings are not receiving the fiber. We have gone more by the Wi-Fi, but that is not the most cost efficient and the best way to do. And therefore, we are in the software, which is represented by the code, so to say, we are reasonably good. We were providing lots of services of that type, but we were not very great in designing the codes as well. Only recently, many Indian companies have come up and building the software as a service, and they have started building. We need to encourage that setup in the country and to allow our software engineers and the entrepreneurs to become the code writers of the world, so to say. Likewise, our networks economy, e-commerce economy is the big fintechs and all. From the global point of view, if you take, we have very few of them. Now we are getting to see some, but they are nowhere close to the global platform companies. So I just gave a little bit of extended explanation for the digital economy, because that is where the biggest opportunity is coming, right? And that is where the opportunity would have to be seized. If we still keep on harping on doing more of industry or agriculture, that is not where the largest value addition will come. I am by no means saying that we should neglect agriculture or we should neglect industry. We must do a lot of investment there and do it. But the biggest returns will come if we take care of the digital economy opportunities. Likewise, a lot of opportunities are emerging in the environmental economy, so to say. This so-called circular economy. If you today makes me and you not look with any pride in ourselves, if 65 of the 100 most polluted cities in the world happen to be Indian cities. I live in Delhi, and in Delhi from November onwards to February, the life is miserable. You don't see the sun. You see the smog, and the 2.5 mg count is much higher than the safe limits. That's not the quality of life which we deserve as Indians. We need to do a lot to do. A lot of opportunities are emerging in this environmental economy. We have done well in installing solar, but again, the solar plants which are doing are basically based on the imports which we make from China, Malaysia, elsewhere. 80% of of what goes into the solar panels is basically imported even today, and therefore we'll need to do a lot to create situations for more of the investment into this and technology. At the root, all of this is that we need to either develop technologies or we need to acquire technology. There is no shame in buying technologies. China in 1978 was a country which had no capital, which had destroyed its private sector, which had no technology age, but they accepted. The only thing they did was, and best thing which they did was that they acknowledged that they don't have capital. they don't have technology, and they don't have private sector. And therefore, they went out to the world, created SEZs and other conditions for the global capital, global technology, and the global private sector to come and invest in China. That is what happened for 40 years. And by now, they have created so much of capital of their own, so much of technological prowess of their own, that they today don't need the West any longer. They are, in fact, the competitors. So that is where in India also, if we don't have the technology, we should acknowledge that it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel, as they say it. It makes more sense to acquire the technology, do the reverse engineering, do the better, and then develop a better and upgraded technology for that, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel once again and in complete sense. So the short point which I am making as the second big change and second big broad brush reform is that the government has to encourage and create right kind of conditions by adopting right kind of policies to encourage the private sector, including the capital and the technology from the world over, to come and invest in the country. And that is what will lead us. The part of that where I said that the public sector need to be privatized, and then that privatized public sector would also be running more efficiently and with better use of capital, will contribute to the growth of the economy. So the first two reforms, major reforms which I talked about, is that the government should be focused exclusively on public goods and services, and the private goods and services should be produced in the private sector, which can be domestic, which should be, we should have very open attitude towards having the foreign technology and capital, because that is what is needed for in the cutting edge areas for the country to produce better goods and services. The last one which I come as the basic reforms is the second role of the government, which is the redistribution. The government is for all of us Indians. And there are poor people, there are vulnerable people, there are people who need support of the government, right? There are about 5 crore in being physically handicapped, old age, for whatever reasons, are not in a position to earn anything. The government need to recognize that these are the people who are not capable of earning themselves, and therefore this is the responsibility of the society, and the society entrusts this job and the responsibility to the government, and therefore the government need to raise and use its tax resources for providing a reasonably decent quality of life to these 5 crore people. Then there are also another 10 to 12 crore people who normally may be able to earn their living, but would require the support of the government in providing the infrastructure, which the government is doing, by the way. In this area, whether it's provision of or assisting the households to get their pakka houses, toilets, electricity connection, water connection, gas, and many other things these are the additional things which the households would need and may not have adequate capital to or the resources to sort of get this done. And therefore, if the government can make these services reach to these people using the public resources, that would be simply great. And likewise, they're taking care of the public health of at least of the people who are either not in a position to earn themselves, or are in a position, or they have the lesser income than what is required for a reasonable standard of life. For them, the health, the education, and the skills acquisition. These are the 3 principal additional needs which the government should be taking. And for taking up these responsibilities, beside the one which I said earlier, that you need to get out of spending funds on the unproductive services like MTNLs and the BSNLs and the Air Indias and the banks and the insurance companies. Those resources should be diverted towards the public goods as well as for redistribution. But at the same time, the government should also take up the two kind of taxes which I have talked about in this book. One is that we need a very good, robust wealth tax system in the country. There are a lot of people who are earning, who have earned a lot and who have created assets and which are of very high orders. By no means of imagination, they can use it for their or their families or 7 generations. They can only use it for making investments, and there also some part of that that wealth should be taken away by the government to do the redistribution. Because at one level, if you compare that, the investment which the guy will make is required for taking care of the minimum needs of the poor indigent people, and therefore a good wealth tax system is what is needed in the country, to my mind. This wealth tax should value the level of income, should tax the extent of wealth. It should also tax the valuation increases which takes place from time to time. If your shares wealth has gone up, let us say from 100 crores to 200 crores, or 1,000 crores to 2,000 crores, only by the appreciation which is there, the government can institute a system of taking, let us say, 1% or 2% or 5% of that increase in the form of the kind itself, that you pay the wealth tax by transferring part of your shares to the government, and the government can then sell it off and use those resources for the redistribution responsibility. The second tax which I talk about in this book is the pollution in the carbon tax. We have done very bad policy by allowing the industry to socialize the pollution and carbon by simply ejecting it out in the atmosphere, in water, in the air. That is not on. The industry has to be held accountable and pay for this lack of cleanliness and the pollution and the carbon which is spread. And I have talked about, like we have a system of GST for the positive value added, we can have a system of negative GST for the carbon and the pollution which is added. It's easy to measure today how much of carbon dioxide you emit, or how much of NOx and the SOx, the sulfur dioxide or the nitrogen oxide you emit in the environment. And that is what the industry should be held accountable. This will also do a good thing by changing the terms of trade between the polluting industry and the non-polluting or the sustainable industry. It will make the sustainable industry sort of better in terms of the margins and the cost to final sale price. So this will be good for the industry. This will be good for producing sustainable goods and services. This will also generate some resources for the government for spending on the cleaning of environment and also for redistribution. So I think these are the 3 big reforms. They lot there in the book about agriculture reforms, about industrial reforms, about MSME reforms, monetary policy, money and currency reforms, the financial sector reforms, because the economy is 360-degree. Economy is so wide, so I didn't want to leave out anything which is an important part of the economy and still crying, there being a crying need for the reforms. And therefore the book is a little bulky book. It's about 700 odd pages, but that is the necessary thing if you want to cover a very wide canvas. I would invite you, because you have been in the forefront of the policy formulation, please go through, discuss debate, and if you have any counter view point on the policy, I would be happy to debate and discuss with you and try to explain that why I have recommended something there. I think I would stop at this stage, and let's now move to the stage of interaction. The comments and questions are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. See, you were part of the team who framed the budget when Mr. Piyush Goyal talked about the 10 trillion economy.
Yes.
But subsequently, it got scaled down, and the PM was also talking about a 5 trillion economy. Why the PM had to tone it down?
See, that is, I think this was perhaps a little more tactical, as well as something which I would give him the credit that something which he can be held accountable. So set a goal, but don't take it a goal in substitution of 10 trillion. I think the goal was to set up a intermediate goal, which can be completed in 5-6 years. But the ultimate goal remains 10 trillion. He had also later on spoken about 10 trillion. It's not that he had not spoken about 10 trillion later on, but to focus the attention of the government, the policymakers, and the people, he started talking about more. I was still there in the government. If you read the budget speech of 1920, which Nirmala Sitharaman delivered, I was still in the government and the finance secretary. That is where we talked about 5 trillion. But that was an intermediate goal. That was not the final goal. By the way, now, if you paid attention, Prime Minister has also talked about this Amrit Kal in 2047. That is still a larger vision, though it has not been concretized and explained in terms of where the GDP or the incomes and what specifically would be done in this Amrit Kal to reach, and to reach where in 2047. Those things have not been talked about. But we can take this as a still longer framework, which is required. You need a long-term planning to make changes in the policies. You can't make changes in policies with only a 1 year or 2 year or 5 years perspective. And therefore, I think all this, the $5 trillion economy, though the government talked about 24-25, but now it seems feasible in 26-27. We have lost 2 years, last 2 years. Then we can set out the 2035 as a 10 trillion. And my calculation suggests that if we take up the right kind of policy reforms, we should be hitting 25 trillions by 2047. It's feasible, but nothing is guaranteed. We can spoil it as well. And therefore, the thinking people of the country, the interested people in the business leaders and all, must get their heads put together to create reforms, and this which can have long-term advantages, not sort of go for the short-term palliatives which might be beneficial to from 3-6 months perspective, etc. These are not going to take us very far.
You think any strategic policy changes are required to take it up to 10 trillion? Or the current measures, whatever are being taken to take it up to 5 trillion in 2020 by 25, will, if continued persistence of the same policy formulation, will take us to 10 trillion maybe a couple of years down?
Yes, let us take example of the privatization of the banks announced by the government, right? So the government came up with a privatization policy in the 21-22 budget. It said that barring some strategic sectors, it would sort of privatize everything. It also said even in the strategic sectors, it will retain minimum presence. And it announced 2 banks to be privatized. It announced 1 insurance company to be privatized. There were also 7-8 companies, the BPCLs and the container corporations, shipping corporation, etc., which were also on the privatization block, right? Now we can view this from 5 trillion perspective, 5-year, 7-year perspective, that these are the companies identified to be privatized during this period. But if we look at from the longer perspective, then one can argue very easily that if you are successfully able to do it in next 3-4 years, then you can do the rest. Privatization in next 5 years or so, and maybe you can in 10 years plan for India to be free of the public sector. So this is, everything is in that sense relatable, but sometimes we may take wrong steps, which may appear to be good for the immediate, but may not be good for the longer term. I gave example of the data policy and the e-commerce policies, etc. These appear to be good for the country in the short term, or for that matter, even take a very important and good policy like PLI, production linked incentive. Production linked incentive scheme is essentially intended to address the cost disadvantage which the companies suffer for making investment in the country. So if you want to do a solar power plant factory, or if you want to produce air conditioners, or if you want to do telecom related investment or the like, and the same company, if it does invest in Vietnam, is in an advantageous position by, let us say, 5 to 6%, then what the government says that, all right, that 5 to 6% we will give you as an incentive, and therefore you choose and come and make investment. That's the logic of PLI, right? But please remember, the fundamental problem is that Indian industry is cost non-competitive. We are identifying some industries to do away with that disadvantage, but the real gain will come when the entire industry is freed from that disadvantage. And that is disadvantage, we know where it is. It's in land. Land is costliest in the country because we have not allowed the non-commercial use of land in the country. Since we have public sector led banking, our loans are the costlier loans in the world. By the way, we also price our power at a very high level to industry. Then consumption. It's very ironical to say that you price the consumption lower and you price the productive use of power as higher. So all these add up to our non-competitiveness, and some non-competitiveness we are trying to address by way of PLI, but the larger non. So again, if you want to align it with the short-term or medium-term goal and the long-term goal, you address it in some industry in the short term, but address it for all the industry in times to come for a longer term. So I think it's very much reconcilable. There is no competition between the two.
Thank you, sir. Talking about the public sector reforms, we were talking that more and more public sector to be privatized. See, basically, it's not that the government did not try, because BPCL disinvestment, you know, where it stuck. And even the government had to tone down the targets of disinvestment from almost around 78,000 crores in the last budget to even 65,000 crores in this budget. So probably it takes its time. No, it's not that it's possible. Otherwise, it will be distress selling.
No, I think there are two reasons why the privatization program and the monetization program of the government is not working. One reason is that we don't get all the policy decisions done right. For example, BPCL, the reason why BPCL is not successfully privatized is that we are not prepared to resolve the pricing of diesel and petrol. If you if you don't allow the price to be passed through, no private sector will invest in a petroleum company. In fact, you would have seen that in last couple of months, when the diesel and petrol prices were frozen, the whatever little private sector we had in the distribution of the diesel and oil, they also decided to shut shop or reduce their. No one will buy with this kind of policy in the countries existing. Take example for that matter of the Concor. The Concor is not getting privatized only because the government is not able to solve the rent which the land which the Concor has to be priced rightly for that. That's the single most reason. If you take 8% of the market price of the land as the premium, your business is completely unprofitable. So long as it is in the public sector, you don't take it. But when you want to do privatization, you say that no, you will have to pay 8% or 7% of the market value of land, then your business is gone. So you can take any example. Let me take another example. You have not been able to do privatization of IDBI simply because we have a very dysfunctional ownership policy for the banks. The owner is not allowed more than 10 to 15% of the voting rights. Now, if you invest 70% or 80%, 70% or 80% of the capital, and you don't get even 15% of the voting rights, why would anybody invest? So every lack of privatization is rooted in some policy problem, right? And the policy problem is that of the government's responsibility. Unless you do it, you may talk about it. You may do all kind of, you may offer all kind of that I tried, I've given 5 times, it will not work. Likewise in monetization, which is the other program, and that is the second point I wanted to make, is that the ability to structure the transaction in the government is very important. I was still in the government when 6 airports were monetized, including the Trivandrum airport, right? And we also faced a lot of resistance and elsewhere, but we made the transaction so efficient, literally, because earlier you can't make use of the city side land. You were given only for 30 years. You were not given, and you were allowed only you were allowing only the airport operators to participate. We argued that why airport operators need to participate. What is the difference between airport terminal management and a mall management or any other infrastructure management? So the key to get the higher bids and the higher participation is to remove all these restrictions. And then you got fantastic bids. We got 5 times the reserve price, and all the 6 airports were monetized. And this is more than 3 years now. The government has not been able to do another set of monetization because there is again policy confusion which has set in. The government now wants to bundle that we will have some of the non-remunerative airports bundled with this. You complicate the life. Then you also say that we will not allow more than 2 airports to be taken by 1 bidder. Now, all this create complications in bidding and interest. And with this kind of approach, if you have, you will not be able to do transactions. So result is that in last 3 years, not a single airport has been further privatized. Similar things is visible in gas pipelines, monetization, road privatization. The government came up with about 6 lakh crores monetization plan. For the year 21-22, the government's target was 88,000 crores, and they have not been able to do even 20,000 crores because of the inability to do a right kind of transactions. So don't blame the lack of time or the lack of interest or believe the effort done. That is not the fact. The fact is that the government is unable to solve the policy issues and is unable to do the structure the transactions well.
But don't you think it could also be because of the high revenue the government is earning from taxation of the oil products? So probably even if it remains in the public sector, the government is more than making it up because of the higher taxes on oil.
See, this is not really the case. For last two years, we are running fiscal deficit in excess of, in 2021, it was actually 9% plus. In 21-22, it's 6.5% plus. For the next year, you have also 6.5% GDP. So government is not flush with money, right? It's not, the tax growth is being cited this year, like you did 5 lakh crores more than the last year, but last year was a very low tax regime. For last 3 years, we are not actually, we have not seen the increase in taxation receipts. But despite whatever increase is visible this year, you have such a large deficit. If you note very carefully, in this year's budget for 22-23, the largest item of expenditure is now interest. The interest payment for next year's budget is 9.5 lakh crores. It is more than your more than in a normal year's borrowing. So that is the real. I don't think by earning in public sector you earn more by way of dividend or otherwise. You don't. The earning is much smaller, right? So I don't think that argument holds.
Mr. Kumaresh Mishra, who is a Bihar cadre IAS officer, former, he has a question. Basically, basically you were talking about distribution of wealth. His question is, industrial investment, manufacturing, or even software is bypassing the eastern states. With 10 trillion, do you see a greater regional disparities in income and disparities, and see eastern India as being left behind?
See, the eastern India is very rich in natural resources, is very rich in human resources, right? But it is not very rich in the entrepreneurial resources. To some extent, the entrepreneurial resources were in a way sort of made to flee that region, especially in Bengal and all. And therefore, the ability of the eastern region to convert the natural resources and the human resources to its advantage by producing, by sort of investing in industrial and the digital enterprises is relatively much less. I don't see in times to come that deficit being addressed very much. They need that entrepreneurial resources, despite being very well endowed with the human resources, the natural resources. I think this is not a very unknown kind of fact. If you have lots of mineral resources, but you don't still make steel, and Japan, which did not have either fossil fuels or the iron ore, made the steel at competitive prices and sold it back to you, or for that matter, even a plant which is existing in the country, the Tata Steel also does produce steel. So it can be done, but that will take time. In the intermediate stage, to my mind, Bihar and the Odissas and the Bengals of the world will do well to sort of invest in the skills and the human resources for not only being more gainfully utilized here, but become a very large resource of the global supply of the skilled labor. I think we must encourage, we shouldn't call it brain drain. There's nothing like brain drain, which is, India is too full of resources, human resources. But if we allow and pursue policies, so there is a chapter in the book about services, and the export of services. I think the Eastern region, if we invest in this, can become the next big source of the global remittances. It's already become to power, but still it is at the lower skills and all. But we can, Bihar can produce fantastic doctors. It can produce fantastic engineers. It can also do quite a lot, and it should do more and more of that. If Andhra can produce slow software engineers for the world, I think Bihar can also produce the software engineers for the world. And that is where we can make the difference.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Asab had another question, but anyway, that you answered. It was basically on 10 trillion versus 5 trillion. Anyway, that has been answered. Now I would go to the next question. It is from an anonymous attendee. He says that he is representing Vigyan Bharati, which is an NGO in the field of education. And his first question is, what is the role of education in this 10 trillion dream?
So there is a chapter on education also in the book, by the way. Education, I view the education sector as an important part of the economy. I have not approached it from the educational or the teaching or from that character education, other things which normally people associated with the education talks about. So about 3% of our economy or GDP comes from the education. And I think all of us have taken note of the tremendous inroads which the edutech companies are making in the education sector. A Baizu is a 15-16 billion dollar company today. An academy and many others are coming, and they are not only serving the education in the country, but they are also serving for many other countries in the world. One can argue that they are in the space which is tuitions and that kind of space, which is more than that. They are not in the general education, like running the primary, elementary schools or the general purpose college. And I think the question I raise in the book is that why does the private enterprise not invest in education? Why does the edutech in the core education, why does it not do? I again trace the fundamental reason to my basic premise that the policy is wrong. We in the country treat the entire education sector, whether it's a general school education or the tertiary college education or technical education, engineering, doctors and all with same brush, that the education is a non-profit activity. Education is a charitable activity. And therefore, whoever wants to invest in this education enterprise can't make profit. And therefore, if it can't make any profit, why would anyone invest? We can do a lot of bhashan for people to make charitable investment, etc. But that would not invite with the operating cost of the educational institutions becoming so high and large, with teachers and everything required to be paid. Now, no charitable institutions is in a position to pay for it. But again, we have a lot of private schools and the colleges and the medical colleges. All of them are either making no profits in their books, but all of their entrepreneurs are making a lot of money by taking off the table or under the table or capitation or whatever. But this is not because this is primarily because of the faulty policy which we had. Till the time we did not allow the gold imports to take place officially, there was so much smuggling going on. Till the time we don't allow a profitable investment in the education, especially in technical education, medical education, and the tertiary education, you would have the relatively less than genuine people running these enterprises and making money on this side. So I think the biggest reform in the education from the economic perspective, which I talk about, is to sort of make the education sector also the for-profit kind of thing. And the second thing which from the redistribution function, that it's the government's responsibility to invest in education, especially for the school education, the primary education, not for college, not for medical college, not for engineering college, etc., but for the primary schools, and also to provide these education opportunities for acquiring the minimum skills which are needed. So health, education, and skills, as I talked about, is where, and health, and I mean the primary health, the education, I mean the primary and the elementary education, and the skills, primary skills, is what the government should. So both ways, permitting the private sector in the profitable part of the education sector, the engineering, medical colleges, and tertiary education, and the government taking up the responsibility of educating everyone in the primary space, is what is the right redistribution and the economic reforms, to my mind.
Thank you, sir. Another question is, will the 10 trillion dream uplift the people in the slums and the BPL category and change their reality?
See, there is a chapter there in this book about slums also. Slums are, again, the result of policies. There are two big policy mistakes which we have made in the country. Number one, we have not allowed freer conversion of agricultural land into non-agricultural land. And there is an artificial deficit of the industrial and the habitational land and the residential land in the country. I have given data and documented this, that we only have about 7 million hectares of land under industrial and the habitation in the country, whereas we have 140 million hectares under the agriculture, right? And the ratio of the value addition per hectare for the agriculture and non-agriculture is 1:200. Despite such a terrific evidence being there, we follow a policy of not allowing more agricultural lands to be transferred for the non-agriculture. In fact, I talk about the agricultural land to be reduced from 140 million hectares to 125 million hectares, which will do better agriculture, and we 15 million hectares, if we can transfer to the non-agricultural use, you will make India's land, which we earlier discussed in the context of higher cost of production in the industry, and the very high residential prices which we have in the country. You can always see in Gujarat, for example, there are the land prices are very low and there are very little of slums, right? But Bombay has a lot of slums, and Bombay's real estate prices are highest in the world. What explains this? Why are there no or very few slums in Gujarat? Why are there so many slums in Mumbai, right? Why is the land and the building prices in Mumbai matching the or higher than the Manhattan prices, whereas Gujarat prices are so low relatively? So the answers are not very far. It's not that people love to live in slums, or slums is a necessity of our existence. It's all because of the policies we follow. So I think rather than thinking whether there is a role or how would the slum people will live in the $10 trillion economy, what we should aim is that there should not be any slums. When there is a $10 trillion economy, there is no need for slums. Why are there no slums in America? Despite some blacks not being interested to work, but there are no slums. So we should also aim at, by pursuing the right kind of policies, that there are no slums.
Thank you, sir. I'll now move on to the last question, again from the anonymous attendee. He is requesting whether you can emphasize on the equitable and equity in distribution of income generated if he achieve this dream successfully.
I think I spoke a lot about redistribution. That's one of the three fundamental planks of my, and I state, in fact, the quote on the back of the book is that besides the capital and the human resources, which are considered as fundamental factors of production, the policy is the real building block, the third building block of the economy. And if we can get policy right, redistribution is also basically a policy decision. If you waste lakhs of crores of rupees in running this shoddy public sector, that money is not available for the redistribution, for the poor and all. So I am quite certain, quite convinced, if we can see an India which is free of public sector, and where the government uses the taxes and the resources only for providing better quality of public goods and also redistribution, the resources would be enough.
As time is running out, I would now request our Vice President, Mr. Veeramani, to say the vote of thanks. And thank you. And thank you from my side for a wonderful session. All of us really enjoyed, and the thoughts are really wonderful, sir.
Thank you.
Respected Speaker of the Day, Sri Subash Chandra Garg, several the people who have logged in today to listen to this talk, and my dear ladies and gentlemen. Just outside the chamber building where I am standing now, about 10 minutes before, thunder and lightning started. But when I was looking at the virtual screen, I found that the thunder and the lightning started about 60 minutes before in Delhi. We were all talking about why privatization was failing in the country or disinvestment was failing in the country. And here it comes from the horse's mouth that it was a failure of the policy. When he talked about privatization, we all felt that he was going on talking or creating more Ambanis and more Adanis. But then he did not stop with it. He came out again with another thunder that the privatization doesn't come easy. He has taken out of dust a Wealth Tax Act which was down and dumped by the government some 10 years before, to say that you don't need the money to pay the wealth tax, but you can transfer the wealth itself to the government. And this is the first time probably we are hearing that the government also has a responsibility to improve the quality of life of those people who are not capable of earning through physical disability. The privatization, sitting in Kerala, his views on the privatization could raise many an eyebrows, because in Kerala we believe in everything being done by the public sector, that too at a subsidized rate. The Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry wishes to place on record its gratitude and thanks to Sri Subash Chandra Garg for his views on India Forward, the 6th talk of the series. The Chamber also wishes to thank all its members and well-wishers for the continued patronage extended to us by logging in even on a Saturday evening. We thank the sponsors who are lending us the continued support for each program. I would take a quote from his book, observation, his book, The 10 Trillion Dreams, which shows the boldness of his expression that expenditure decisions by the government are truly reflective of the people's choices. But unfortunately, when you convert the people's choices into that of the political parties, that objective is not often met. We have seen many a feature film end with a lead that a sequel is to follow. Rarely have we seen a book leaving such a suspense. He states in his book, "My world changed drastically after the new finance minister joined," which was a scene after the 2019 general election, and then leaves the reader guessing. when quizzed for the backroom truth on what really went wrong between him and the feisty lady boss, he says his second book will be out later this year. We would definitely wait for it. Looking at his views on privatization, I would end with a quote. Happy are those who dream dreams and are willing to pay the price to make them come true. Thank you for all of you for joining us, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good night.
Good night, sir.